What up, Wizards? It's Dev, SBMTG. We like it a magic. We like it so much that we don't do no top 10 lists. That's for chumps what can't spit like me. Now, today we're going to talk about the top 25 cards in Phyrexia All Will Be One. But of course, this is one of my lists, so you know it's actually going to be closer to a top 50. We got no time to waste. Let's go ahead and get to it after you look at this cat. Is that a good enough intro? Is it not? Well, how about another cat then? Would that make it a better intro? All right, let's start the list with the honorable mentions. So this is usually where I like to park cards that I know are terrible, but I can't help myself and I like them anyway. There's probably no better illustration of that in the whole set. You all right, Igby? Than Scheming Aspirant right here. This can't make the list, sadly, but still, I got some schemes I aspire to with this handsome fella once the set comes out. Too bad they're not going to work. It's probably just not a very good card, sadly, but I would be upset if no one ever talked about it. So here I am bringing it up because he's my kind of magic, no denying, you know. Bad magic cards are my kind of cards. But moving on, there's also Zenith Chronicler. Want to bring this thing up. It's probably good in some, but not all, games of Commander every now and again. That's probably about it. But drawing cards is really good. Like I will say in Standard, I guess you go first, you drop this, your opponent goes turn 2 Blood Tithe Harvester, you draw yourself a card. Corpse Appraiser next turn, draw yourself a card, but that's not actually going to happen because they'll just use the Harvester to kill the Chronicler before you can draw a card from the Corpse Appraiser being played. It's even in the best case scenario in Standard, the card's still kind of not very good, so that's sad. But drawing cards, I think I've already said this, it's very good. So like maybe a decent card here. Now, the third honorable mention is, and this is going to sound cheesy, but bear with me, your favorite card, whatever that is, right? Because there's a bunch of really good cards in this set, and I'm not going to be able to get to them all. And that's lame. So, you know, whether you like Malcator, which seems like a cool guy, you know, Ozorius card that puts 4 power and toughness into play for 3 mana, sure. That seems okay. Or maybe you like Geth. I think Geth is actually really cool. I played against it in the early access event. He seemed like pretty hostile. So good dude. Or maybe you like Blue Sun's Twilight, or I was going to say Zenith, or White Sun's Twilight. I was going to say Zenith again for some reason. Seen a lot of talk about those. So again, had the blue one played against me in the early access, was very, very annoying. They stole my Leer, jerks. But anyway, all these cards are good. If you're looking for Black Sun Zenith, by the way, or Capricious Hellraiser, they're in the top 10 sleepers video. Make sure you check that one out. But after you do that, make sure you go to the comment section and let me know what I missed in this video, because there's a bunch of really good cards in the set. I don't want to leave anything out. Oh, also, just last thing in the honorable mention, lands. There's lots of lands. There's the fast lands in this set, completing the cycle, looking really good. All the allied color fast lands, awesome. We need those. Probably the best cards in the set when you think about it. But of course, in the top 25, the first 5 entries always tend to sort of be extensions of the honorable mentions. So let's go ahead and get to it. Number 25 is a card that was an honorable mention for a while and eventually got promoted to the actual list. It's Norn's Wellspring. I actually really like this. I think it's probably Commander playable. If you don't know me, welcome to the channel. I like Elysil Core. We're getting married. We still haven't. We haven't set a date even, but she promises me. We'll see. But one way or the other, I really like Elysil Core. And this is actually a sweet card for Elysil Core Commander decks, or perhaps even Brawl decks, or Historic Brawl. I don't know what you're doing. But one way or the other, if you're in a singleton format, I could actually see playing this card in your Aristocrats deck, so I kind of like it. Number 24 is Ezri, Stalker of Spears. Yeah, I'll give this card a little bit of credit, but just a little bit. I think it's, again, probably a cool commander. I was schooled on this during previous season. I was like, what other commanders are there that proliferate? Apparently there are a couple that are like really important. So maybe this is in the 99 of other decks, or maybe it's just an important proliferate commander and specifically the Simic color combination. But I can see it being like pretty fun there. But in Standard, probably not. Now, number 23 is a card that I really like, but I had to restrain myself because I know it's not like amazing, but I still wanted to be on my list. And number 23 is Drivnod, the Black Dominus. This card is awesome. I think that not every Dominus, by the way, made this list. Only a couple of did. And this is one of the very few that managed to make it. And I think it's mostly because of my subjective love for the card. I think I may have already pointed this out, but I like Elysil Core. I just like aristocrats decks in general. I like sacrificing stuff and getting triggers and doing this like weird Rube Goldberg machine where like I start over here and it's like Pee Wee Herman's breakfast and eventually I get a fried egg, which is my dead opponent. Did that make any sense? And if you actually get it to stick, which isn't too hard, then it's going to drive some people crazy. So I really like this card a good bit if you can't tell. Number 22 is Blade of Shared Souls. I saw a couple of people in the comment section of the sleeper video who were like, would Blade of Shared Souls, my sleeper, and like, yeah, it's just on my list. That's why you didn't see it in that video. It's because I think this card is just kind of good. Again, it might just be commander playable, but I think in that format, it's what's the word I'm looking for? Amazing. People love their clone effects, man, and this is a relatively cheap one that's just everlasting, unless they can blow up the artifact itself. But a 3-mana clone that clones any of your dudes. That even if they kill your clone, you still get to clone guys. It's fantastic to me. So for a relatively low cost for an effect like this too. But while we're on the subject of swords, why not Sword of Gruul? That's what I've got written down in my notebook. Sword of Gruul, Dev. What's the actual name of the card? Who knows? If you do get this staple to something, really good value, man. Like you actually get a pretty decent little bonus. Protection from red is great in some cases. Protection from green is fine. Not a lot of green in the format that we know of. I think that may change once the set really hits the streets, but one way or the other, card is just kind of okay, and I'm not disappointed by it. Honestly, these days, I don't know what you have to do to make a sword like unbelievable in standard. Like it has to be better than this, right? But it's still good. It's still, mark my words, probably won't see much play, but it's still good. It's a good card. But number 20, I wonder if this is going to be controversial. Number 20 is Phyrexia Arena. Here's the thing. I don't know how much play it sees in standard. You know, we all got nuts about Liliana of the Veil being reprinted into standard. Now we have another iconic black 3-drop for the mono black deck. I think it probably ends up in that deck as a 1 or 2 of, especially in best of 3 where you can board the card. I think it's probably better there. But honestly, even in best of 3, I'm not like convinced. The best thing this has going for it in current standard is that if you go this on 3, Shieldred on 4, then suddenly you're netting a life gain every time you draw that card. And that could be a powerful enough interaction to see some play. But honestly, we're in the kind of meta right now where it's a little slow, don't get me wrong, but you still can't skip your turn 3. It's not that slow, especially with some of the other stuff that this set enables. So I'm just not super sure about the playability and standard of this, but it is a very important reprint to drive the price down for some people who want to play it in Commander, and everyone does. Now, as we dip into the teens here, number 19 is going to seem like a slap in the face to Phyrexia Arena. I understand those optics, okay? But there are just some cards that I can't help myself with. And I've shown a lot of restraint. I've been very good so far in this video. Drivnod is not in the top 10 or anything. Scheming Aspirin isn't even on the list. I've shown a great deal of discipline up to this point so far, but with cards like Vran, I just can't. I have to fall in love with them, man. I know that this says only once each turn. I still think that's like more than enough. I actually think there's a possibility this sees play in standard in the Esper deck that just plays like nothing but Oops All Legends Esper, you know? Like maybe it slots in like as a 1 or 2 of in that 2-drop slot. And as a commander, I could see it seeing play either as the general, are we still using that word? Or just in the 99 of all these aristocrats decks, you almost have to play it. So really not the strongest uncommon in the world, but like maybe my favorite guy from the whole set. So I promise you, I'm still showing some restraint here. Number 18 is Unctus. I love saying the card's name, first of all. But I also, another great example of a card that can see some sparing standard play here and there, but also just be a great commander or in the 99 of other commander decks. He works great in the 99 of the 4-mana Urza deck, the Azorius one that gives all your artifacts +2/+2. Great in the 99 of that, but also really good in the Urza deck in standard, you know, because you can go this on 3 and Urza on 4, and suddenly all your artifact dudes gets +3/+3. And you can turn your Urza into an artifact creature. So and it gets +2/+2 and +1/+1 from Unctus. It's just like, dude, like, I actually think that this is like maybe the thing that pushes the Azorius artifact aggro deck into playability. But like apart from that, it's just a cool card. Let's move on to 17 Filigree Silex, everybody. This was actually like number 11 for a long time, and I got to thinking about it, and I'm like, it's a sweeper. You know, sweepers just aren't what they used to be, but it's still good. You know, this is a substitute for like ratchet bombs and powder kegs and stuff in other formats if you ain't got them. This can blow up all the tokens and stuff for nothing, which is kind of nice and might actually be worth playing in standard for that reason too. But I mostly think this is a sideboard sweeper or a sweeper for like super specialized decks that just don't have a whole lot of options for other sweepers. I think this might have some relevance at some point, but again, they mostly seem like board sweepers for specific matchups, but that's still a powerful card that's going to end up seeing play. Also, sweepers always seemed pretty metal, so I'm glad that we actually have one that literally is now. But let's move on to 16, a card that wasn't even on the list for like 3 days while I was writing this thing. But the more I look through Mythic Spoiler, the more it draws my eye, and the more I'm like, yeah, you. So let's look at Vindictive Flamestoker real quick. Bram Stoker draws 4 cards eventually. It's just 1 mana. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, not instant or sorcery, non-creature spell, you put a counter on it, roll a counter. And you can eventually sack it for a buttload of mana and draw those 4 after discarding your hand. The thing is, it costs 1 less to activate the ability for each oil counter on it. So you can get this down to just like 1 red mana, but even if it's 3 or 4 mana, I think it's still worth it if you don't have any cards or bad cards to pitch and draw four cards from your 1 drop. And there's so many ways to do it, whether it's maybe you play it in the board of mono red aggro in some matchups, but you've got Kumano Faces Kakuzan, Mechanized Warfare, sometimes Fable of the Mirror Breaker in some of those decks, you know, so you've got Lightning Strike, obviously, Strangle, Shock Effects and stuff. So a bunch of you've already got a bunch of non-creatures for Monastery Swiftspear, right? So actually kind of works well in that deck and then gives you this huge refill late in the game, which that deck needs. But even in mid-range decks like, you know, Jund and stuff, again, if you play Fable of the Mirror Breaker, cards like that, it really benefits stuff like this, you know, so I just think that this is actually almost a sleeper card, but it was just so like good looking after a time to me that it ended up making the actual list. And it's actually like a good ways down here. I think this card is great. But for number 15, let's look at Migloz. Is that how you say his name? I'm not really sure. Migloz? My gloves are off for this one. This is a good card, man. Just 3 mana 4/4. It fine stats and has like literally 0 downside whatsoever. As a matter of fact, it's all upside. You can bust stuff up. You can get bigger. You can be hard to block or hit with the Wandering Emperor, which I think is like super relevant, you know. He just, if your opponent does let him through, suddenly he can slam for all the damage. Just da, you know. Let the boys be boys. He slams hard is all I'm saying. Shout out to Onyx. Number 14, I'm cheating here a little bit and just saying like big green men. Just there's a bunch of big green boys in this set. And some of them aren't even that big, you know, evolving adaptive. Maybe in some ways slightly the most important creature of this whole lineup I'm about to show you. But it can technically get very, very large. So I wanted to bring him up. But there's also Thrun, the 5 mana, just completely unkillable sort of troll thing that looks amazing. Just a solid card. There's Bloated Contaminator, another 3 mana 4/4 with nothing but upside, and a lot of it. You know, it helps proliferate decks in standard along with poison counter decks, and usually they are one and the same. Just a good card. And then I guess Tyrannax Rex, if there was like an honorable mention in this big green guys section. Yet another boardable kind of thing or reanimation target, but there's a lot of really good reanimation targets. Still, against like control matchups, you probably put a copy or 2 of this in your sideboard. So again, it's gonna see some play one way or the other. Just all these guys are great. Bloated Contaminator seemed really swole in the early access event. So did Evolving Adaptive for that matter. It's just like really, I guess Evolved Spinoderm even goes in. There's a lot of big green men in this set, and they all look like pretty handsome. I'd date them. They look good. But number 13 is another little green creature this time that kind of blows all those big dudes out of the water, and that's Cankerbloom. I really think this is in a class all its own in terms of like green dudes in this set. So it's a little memey to name like every green creature, and then the next entry is a green creature. But I really think that Cankerbloom is like a little bit apart from those other things. For one, either a fun or gross name to say, depending on how you kind of feel in the moment. Right now, I'm kind of feeling goofy, so I like saying Cankerbloom. Cankabloom. It's almost a Pokemon, isn't it? Cankabloom. But it's a great card, man. If you got nothing else to do with it, at least you can proliferate, and that's going to matter with poison counters, planeswalkers, blah, blah, blah. But if you have stuff to do with it, it's obviously wonderful. This is another thing that kind of breaks Fable of the Mirror Breaker. We got a few of those in this set, and every other set, the last few sets, I feel like there's been a lot of stuff that breaks artifacts and enchantments, like main deck playable. We get Besage You and stuff. So this is yet another thing that is just like a 2 mana Like, it's playable no matter what. If your opponent doesn't play a single artifact or enchantment in their deck, it's still a 2-mana, 3-power guy that proliferates sometimes, blocks well, trades well. It's just fantastic. Gets in damage nicely. But if your opponent does have Reckoner Bankbuster, which everyone does, or Wedding Announcement, which everyone does, or Fabled Mirror Breaker, which everyone does, and suddenly this guy gets even better. But let's move on to, where are we? 12? Yeah, something like that. Number 12 is Gleeful Demolition. Yet another like lower rarity card all the way down here, but I think this is seriously this good. In older formats, you can target one of your indestructible lands with this. Have you seen this trick? Maybe you go like Mountain turn 1, turn 2 Citadel, Darksteel Citadel or whatever. Just target it, get your guys, feeling good. So, man, the card looks great for that reason. But I guess even as far back as Legacy, you could easily play like Mox Ruby turn 1, right? Tap the Ruby to cast this and sack the Ruby and get 3 guys on turn 1, which is phenomenal. Like, even in Legacy, that is phenomenal. Like, that's AJ Styles, baby. It's coming off with a forearm right in your face. It's just that. I'm telling you, this thing is a sucker punch. And in formats where you have access to things like Reckless Bushwhacker, for instance, it gets like way better. But even in Standard, we have a 2-mana Goblin Anthem effect right now, and a ton of treasure tokens and blood tokens for this to play off. We got Oni Colt Anvil is in the format. So like, this card could see play from Standard all the dang way back to Vintage. And I mean it. This card is very powerful. Number 11, usually kind of an honorable mention for the top 10 list, and this time we're cheating again. It's Phyrexian Obliterator / Vindicator. That's right. I kind of chickened out a little bit. For the longest time, I had Vindicator and then Obliterator, separate spots of the list, one after the other. But then I realized that if I put them on the same spot in the list, I can put more cards on the list. I still think that Obliterator is the slightly more punishing card that will fit into a slightly more popular deck, although Mono White is a good deck in Standard. So I think both of these cards are playable. But we definitely have way more of a history to go off of with Obliterator, and we know that is a miserable card to play against. We only feel that way with Vindicator now, and I'm pretty sure we will be vindicated in those emotions very soon. But still, I think Obliterator is very likely still the nastier card, but both of this being in Standard at the same time is kind of scary a little bit. But I know that those are two of the most hyped rares or mythics or whatever they are in the entire set, and everyone's like, oh my god, look at them cards. But I actually think that we're going to open the top 10 here with another uncommon. I think that Tyvar's Stand is easily one of the best cards in the whole set. What do you have to do to make Howl from Beyond playable in 2023? Oh, just make it, staple it to like one of the best green protection effects of all time. Like, oh my god, I'm losing my mind. Like, having to think about the fact this card even exists in the format, and it also goes in one of the legit scariest decks in the early days of the format that I think might actually be real. We'll talk about that one in a minute. But Stand is just why? That's my question. I'm already annoyed by this card, and I've played against it once. Number 9 is Skrell's Hive. This one was like actually kind of way up the list the first few times I wrote it. I wrote this list a bunch. I just couldn't figure out how to order it, but this card was up there at like 18, 17, floating around for a while. Critter Blossom, we call it around these parts. Actually, I was so convinced that the creatures don't fly, they can't block, it's just going to be a poopy Bitter Blossom, no one's going to care. Actually, it goes in Mono White decks, it goes in the Selesnya Toxic decks, it goes in the Naya Tokens decks, it just goes in freaking everything, and even if it starts losing you some life from time to time, eventually it's going to gain you that life right back. It's great against control, let me throw that out there. It's really good in late games for just like a continual source of creature production. Turns out you need that a lot in Standard. It's the card turned out, at least in early access, to impress me very much. And I know that early access is a time of jank, goofy stuff, trying new cards, and you can't use that as a judgment. But this card seemed good beyond early access, if that makes any sense. This card seemed good in a way that made it seem very good outside of the confines of a janky event where everyone's trying dumb crap. So this card seemed great to me, and it jumped several spots on the list due to that. But number 8, this one might be controversial. Elish Norn, Mother of Machines. Are you done booing? Okay, so I think that by now, actually, a lot of us have come around to like, oh, this card is just kind of fine. You know, it's going to go in all them Yorion decks. Yeah, sure. But it's also a great commander, I'm sure, that there's already people talking about whether or not this is viable in CEDH, competitive EDH. And I think those are interesting conversations too. But ultimately, even in EDH, I'm just not like super convinced. This is going to have to convince me, but multiple cards that I thought weren't going to be like amazing but solid have convinced me lately. Shieldred convinced me, obviously. But I just don't think this is a repeat of Shieldred. Again, I've said this before, but Shieldred just punishes your opponent for playing Magic, rewards you for playing Magic. This is a highly specialized card that costs more than Shieldred to get out in the first place and all that. It's just a relatively expensive thing that doesn't have a whole lot of actual impact on the board unless you can enable it in some way, and that's easier said than done. Now, in mono white, I think you might play a copy or two of this. It benefits you playing Spirited Companions and Sanctuary Wardens and Ambitious Farmhands and stuff, you know. But ultimately, I think that the card is fine. Much better than fine, actually, because if I have to remind you, it's still in my top 10 cards in the set. Like, I'm hyped about it. I just don't think the card's like in the top 3 like some people are going to think. Number 7 is Atraxa Grand Unifier, just because she's the best reanimation target in the format, like instantly. And I know I've heard arguments that like Titan of Industry is probably better, and I think there's definitely game states where Titan is going to be better, and there's game states where Atraxa is going to be better. But in terms of the body, just banging, right? Like this is a 7/7 flying, trample, lifelink, death. It does other stuff. It does all this stuff, you know. But it also puts like at least 3 cards in your hand. Most of if you built your deck right, it's probably going to put at least 3, and on a bad pull, it's going to still put 2 cards in your hand. And I think that, especially considering you're like never paying full price for this, and sometimes you'll get to that point in the game and you'll feel fine doing so. But if your deck is built like I think most Atraxa decks will be built, you're trying to get this on the table on turn 4. And if you do that, you probably win even if your opponent can remove the Atraxa, unless you're just like super far behind at that point. So, you know, against like red decks, it's just not going to die. So there's nothing I don't really like about this. It costs 1 billion mana and you have to work hard to get it too, because it's like 4 different colors. But I still think that you're not going to actually cast it. People seem to be forgetting you don't cast this card. Number 6, this one, I guess I couldn't help myself. I really couldn't restrain, but this is in the top 10, ladies and gentlemen. Number 6 is Melira, the Living Cure. Yeah, I think this card's that good. First of all, I think that the first line of text in this card is actually going to be relevant, even if the first line of text isn't relevant in standard, which I think it might be. It's still main deckable. It's Watch Wolf stats. It's 2 mana for 3/3, which isn't as impressive these days, but it's still something you point out when you see it, right? But it's kind of a Safi Eric's daughter. Now, you don't have a bunch of like dumb combos that make people mad. You can't just loop things, but I still think that we have a curve now that's like Melira onto the next card on the list on turn 3, and then Shieldred on turn 4, and you have the Melira to protect those 2 very important to protect legends in your Abzan deck. And I think that just that is worthy of like being one of the most considerable, if not most played, but most considerable when building your deck. 2 drops in all of standard. The stats are there. It protects important creatures, which is just good. I don't know. Like, creatures die. There's so much removal in standard. People feel like they have to pack 22 mana removal spells because Shieldred's a spell in the format. And in a format like that, I feel like Melira shines. So I probably said enough about this card. I don't want to gush about her all day, but if you can't tell, she's in my top 10. I really, really like this card, and I think it's going places. But let me quit Melirin at her and look at number 5, which is Glissa Sunslayer. I teased this a second ago. You can go Melira on 3, Glissa, or Melira on 2, Glissa on 3, Shieldred on 4. There's just not a lot of better curves in standard than that, but even just Glissa into Shieldred is probably good enough. First Strike Death Touch is such a ridiculous combination, dude. Bananas. But if she does get through, she can bust stuff, she can draw you cards, she can just kill planeswalkers or whatever. Some of the time. So, like it. Think it's sick, actually. This is one of the better 3-drops in standard. I really think it's one of those. But number 4 is Venerated Rot Priest. I'm not the only one saying this either. This one was in the top like 20 originally. I put this at like 16 or something like that. But After seeing this in early access, I gotta rethink that, man. And honestly, it's probably worth more than just having seen the card in action in standard in like a fake, like a pseudo standard environment. I think the card could actually see play in older formats, obviously, in like infect piles and stuff like that. But back to standard for a second here. This is playable in like the green-white infect, like the green-white toxic deck with Slaughter Singer. It's a good card there. But where it's truly dangerous is in the Poison Ivy deck, the Simic Ivy Gleeful Spell Thief deck. Because, you know, if you go this on one, Ivy on two, and you actually untap with both of them in play, you just win the game. Because you can target your opponent, you can target your own creatures with your own spells and basically double poison the opponent with each time you do that. This deck looks actually dangerous, not meme-ish, honestly. And Venerated Raw Priest is a huge part of that deck, but a big part of pretty much every other deck that wants to put poison counters on an opponent in any format for just 1 mana. This does that and protects all your guys. Just come on, man. This actually is, I think, without a doubt, one of the best cards in the set. Let's move on, though, to the top 3. Are we ready, ladies and gentlemen? Number 3 is Planeswalkers. Yeah, I did this. I cheated on this one like pretty hard because if I didn't, it would be like a top 35 or something. And I guess we could do that. I just didn't feel like it. I felt like ending this video at some point in my lifetime. So I just decided to do Planeswalkers at number 3 because they all seem okay. We'll list these out real quick in sort of ascending order, I guess. Kaito is the first one I want to bring up. He's fine. It's the definition of a fine card. Sucks you have to get through for combat damage, but I guess the 3-mana Kaito works really well. He plays with himself nicely. Lol, pause for lol. But, you know, he makes unblockable guys. So you get through for combat damage, double perk him. He seems okay, but just okay. Number 9 is Luca. This has fallen a few slots. I still think this is a good card. Remember, Planeswalkers are number 3. I still think this is a fine card. Ramp is good. You can untap into Titan of Industry once you play this or something. Making 3/3s is just fine. That's the thing, is I played this guy in early access and I played against him in early access. And whether he's on my side of the table or theirs, he just kind of seems okay. Like he's just there. Number 8 is Koth, if only because this is the quintessential mono red Planeswalker. If there's a big red deck in standard, Koth is both in it and a huge part of why there's a big red deck in standard. Number 7 is Nahiri. I don't think this is going to be great in standard. I don't. But I think in older formats, it could still do some really janky, fun stuff. But janky, like on the strong end of janky. Number 6 is Jace. This is actually showing some promise in the early days as a 3-mana Planeswalker that's on curve with some other stuff that you might be doing in Super Friends or Esper or whatever. Number 5 is Wanderer. You can't kill her. It's very difficult to take this card out. And again, fits pretty well into the mono white decks that might just cut a copy of like Sanctuary Warden, throw in a copy of this, see how it works, kid. I actually think it's going to work really well. Number 4 is Vraska. Nice little value Planeswalker here for not too high of a price in terms of the casting cost. Being able to cast it for just 5 is important, and it's going to kill at least a couple of creatures or draw you a few cards. Proliferate proved to be very important a couple of times from what I've seen in early access, both me playing decks and other people playing decks. So Vraska just looks solid, and that's all you have to be to hit number 4 here. Number 3 is Nissa. Very powerful Planeswalker. Extremely powerful Planeswalker. As a matter of fact, does all of them things. Plussing. Let me just throw this out here. Plussing to make a big dude is so much better than Ren and Sevis. Nissa is very good on pretty much every axis, but a little expensive. And if she's not expensive, she's expensive in terms of life. So there's that. But number 2 is Kaya. This card, once it is in play, is unbeatable. I compared this to Ugin the Spirit Dragon during preview season. And I said then that I don't know if this was the best comparison, but now I think it actually is a great comparison. Once it's on the table, how are you going to beat it? What do you do? If your opponent has been plussing it turn after turn to bolt you to death or whatever, and putting you in a deeper and deeper hole, eventually you're going to find a threat. You're going to land a threat to be able to attack into her. Oh, she can just -3 and kill it. Okay, so like the card is just... What do you do? Number 1 is Tyvar. This card has jumped a few spots. I played against this in early access, and it was basically the most impressive looking card, new card that I played against all night long. There's a ton of great 2-drops for this to work with in standard. I pointed out Urborg, Lurgoyf, Stick Fingers. I think those are fun cards. But there's so much more this works with. In Jund, Blood Tithe Harvester, being able to not only reanimate the Harvester, but it can immediately tap to kill something the turn it comes into play. Like that's... All of that is so much better than you can possibly imagine. Man, I have really spent too long on Tyvar, but that's because I think this is, again, one of the best cards in the set. kind of easy. But let's move on finally to number 2, which is Mondrak Glory Dominus. That's right, the other Dominus in the set. It's all the way up here. So this is a protectable Anointed Procession. Usually, going from enchantment to creature would make a card more fragile, but Anointed Procession doesn't have an I'm suddenly indestructible mode. And especially not, this isn't even like an instant speed indestructibility. This is like a, if you got nothing better to do at the end of your opponent's turn, you might as well put an indestructible counter on it. And then you can proliferate the counter. Like, come on, man. That's pretty good. I mean, I know they all work that way, but I feel like this especially is one that you really need to protect once it's out. It's not cheap to get out, but some of these things cost 5 mana. This thing only costs 4. Relatively easy to protect too. You know, I mean, again, you're a tokens deck. Probably. You got Wedding Announcement. You got little dudes you don't mind sacking, like, again, Ambitious Farmhand, Spirited Companion, all those guys. You've got Wandering Emperor tokens laying around. You really don't mind. So think about how good this works with the Wandering Emperor. My God. Like, you cast Emperor at instant speed and you instantly get 2 tokens. Like, yeesh. And it works obviously well with aforementioned cards like Wedding Announcement and stuff. Just like in standard, the card is a beast, but beyond, it's obviously a second copy of Anointed Procession in your commander decks. So like, yeah, the card's worth the hype there too. It's just easily could be number 1 to be honest, but not quite. But number 1 is another white Phyrexian legendary creature that I honestly think, aside from 1 or 2 other cards, really, stands head and shoulders above everything else in the entire set. It might as well be the biggest card in the set, even though technically it's the smallest card in the set. Number 1 is Skrelv. And honestly, I really don't think this one's debatable. This is the only one that never changed position. You know, at some point, Planeswalkers were 5, and then they were number 2, and now they're number 3, and like everything on this list. Elish Norm was number 4 at one point. She moved up, so everything on this list has changed positions except Skrelv. Skrelv's been a hard number 1 for me pretty much the whole week I've been writing this thing and rewriting it and rewriting it. This is Mother of Runes with extra steps, but it turns out that's still great. You know, earlier, I specifically deliberately did not mention this card. When I was talking about the curve of like Malira into Glissa into Shieldred, you actually have Skrelv into Malira as your curve now. Well, think about that. Like on 1 or 2, you have a chance to cast one of, if not both, of these creatures in the early game that can protect your extremely important dudes later on in the game in your legendary deck. Skrelv and Malira for that matter, but we're focusing on Skrelv here. Can protect your Rafine or your Shieldred, and these are just things you really want to do. I shouldn't have to tell you that. You really want to do those things. In just a mono white deck, it protects your, you know, Sanctuary Warden or whatever. Helps it get through for combat damage too. Let's not forget that part of the card. You know, it easily helps it get through for combat damage and in the game and stuff. So, oh my goodness. And a lot of the time it's going to be worth paying the 2 life to do it, but a lot of the time you won't have to. It's only 1 mana and a tap to activate this ability. By the way, Tyvar, he says untap target creature. I just wanted to point that out. Again, if you needed any more reason why I think Abzan might be a decent deck, it's like you play Tyvar in that deck along with Skrelv and Malira, and this can untap your, Tyvar untaps your Skrelv so it can protect more stuff or send more stuff through for combat damage. Just, it's got Toxic too, so like Toxic 1, it has Toxic Tambien also. So, you know, even if you got nothing to protect with in the early game, you get some Toxic damage on them, you know. So, I don't know, man. I think I also kind of like that it can't block, because then I, a bad Magic player, am not tempted to block with it. You know, but this, it's going to protect your Reflection of Kiki Jiki. By the way, back when I was talking about Tyvar, I should have mentioned that when Reflection, when Fable flips over to Reflection, Tyvar just lets you use it that turn. Do you need more evidence why Tyvar is a good card? But anyway, back to Skrelv. It's the best card in the set, and I mean it. There's no might to it. It's definite. Anyway, last... I'm going to take you out with one more pun. But anyway, everybody, that's all the cards I had to talk about today. But again, let me know down there in the comments section anything that I may have missed. Make sure you check out the top 10 sleepers video Link in the description for that, kind of a companion piece to the top 25 every season, where we talk about all the stuff that people aren't talking about, and maybe your favorite cards are there. You can watch me play live on twitch.tv/SBMTGDev when the set comes out. Link in the description of that down there. And if you want to support the content, it would mean a lot to me. It's just $1 a month for Patreon, patreon.com/SBMTG. Again, link in the description. I really couldn't do this without viewer support, so I really appreciate all of you who are already doing it. You're about to see your names at the end of the video, and if you want to do it, that would be awesome. You're awesome. You're so cool. He's a sweet, sleepy, purry man. But anyway, that's actually all I really have this time. I've said it like 5 times, but I'm serious this time. That's all I got. So I'm Dev from the Blaze. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind. Devthany Listano. Phyrexia top 25 cards forever.